Okay, we should be live on Facebook and back to Zoom. Okay, so just a note for the translator, I'm not recording this. You are, right? Okay, all right. Sorry, I can't hear you. Maybe I should wear my earphones. But no, because you would be on another channel anyway. It doesn't matter. Yeah, yeah. So, okay, let me just mute my computer and my phone. Otherwise, it's gonna be a whole bing bong. Oh, they tell me that they cannot hear me on Facebook. Okay. Oh, maybe I haven't selected the right microphone. No, I have. The audio's not coming through Facebook. Well, I don't know what to do about Facebook. I mean, my microphone is on. Testing. Testing. It's sound. No, I am on Facebook, so everybody can hear me. I don't know. So I'm gonna start. Okay, so welcome everybody, the six of you that are there. I was not expecting a huge turn up given the topic, and that's fine. A little disclaimer, I'll be doing a lot of disclaimers. The first one is that I lost it already. The first disclaimer was that it's not coming to me. But anyway, yes, I was not expecting a lot of people to come because given the schedule and the other speakers who are speaking straight from the scriptures, it seems a bit, less than to talk about pranayama. Excuse me just a second, just to make sure that, yeah, okay, so the audio is working on Facebook. All right. Oh yeah, that was the first disclaimer. I did all my prayers, so in case I look like a nonconformist, as you know from my previous series of talks, I do my prayers before just to make the best use of this 1 hour that people log in to listen, and also the ones that will listen to the recording later on. So just rest assured that I just prayed to be a transparent vehicle and to be speaking about prana from a Gaudiya perspective, which is the title of this presentation. And the second disclaimer is that, as many of you may know, the guest season here in Madhuvan, actually, the first disclaimer and a half is that we're in the middle of the cicada season. So I'm sorry about this noise. It's not your computer, it's not my computer, but the cicadas are like very, very. Okay. Okay, I need to stop these messages because I don't know if they're for me about the talk or about private stuff. So, yes, the cicadas are very fiercely proclaiming their will to mate, and there's nothing I can do about it. All I can do is speak louder and apologize for this constant noise. At least it's not rain on the roof. Okay, so the second disclaimer is that the guest season just ended. Guru Maharaj, my Guru Maharaj, Tripurari Maharaj, left Madhuvan on the 20th of January, but then we had two somewhat unexpected guests who came and stayed here for 10 days. So I was we were still in like guest mood, and I did prepare for this presentation, just not as well in terms of like PowerPoint presentation and collecting my thoughts, not as well as the previous one. One more reason to pray for like, inspiration to come through my mouth so that I can talk about prana and pranayama and be speaking Gaudiya Siddhanta. So, my idea for these 4 meetings was roughly, because we saw last time that it's really hard once the conversation kicks in to really stick to a schedule. And, this is the first meeting, we have to talk about this, and in the second, we have to talk about that. But roughly, I will be speaking about the idea for this presentation and just in very generic terms in this one meeting. And then in the second meeting, we'll be talking about pranayama in more physical, maybe boring terms, but I mean, you have to know what it is that we're talking about in order to look at it in a Gaudiya perspective. And then the third meeting will be more of the realizations and the actual way that a Gaudiya could approach pranayama, or just have an opinion of it. And in the fourth one, I was thinking of leaving it open for questions, or just see all the citations wherever prana is mentioned in our prayers, in our scriptures. Prana both as in life force, there's a lot of mention of prana, or just very physical references to prana in our scriptures. So as far as today, I can tell you a little bit about the idea that I had and why I had it after I have a sip of water. Srila Padmanabh Maharaj asked me graciously to give classes for the month of February. And I had another idea in mind, but then somehow I started to have these realizations popping in my head about pranayama and the approach. And my generic feeling, whether the theme was pranayama or the idea that I had for this month or for the next time that Padmanabh Maharaj would ask me to speak, was not much to talk from the scriptures and a section of the scriptures per se, because whether I am distracted with my business activity, my work, or it's just my lack of qualification, it feels like very time consuming to talk from scriptures, about the scriptures. Now the truth is that a lot of people will choose a verse to talk about. I've witnessed a lot of classes in other institutions especially, where the class is about a verse, and then they talk about psychology and current events, whatever is on their minds, and the verse is just there as a background. So that's something that doesn't quite attract me. So I have no problem talking about the scriptures, from the scriptures and about the scriptures, especially because whether it's about prayer or my presentation on prayer, or this one about pranayama, I did have to dedicate time to collect my thoughts in the very least, but more than that, to collect facts and use them as base for my presentation. So might as well study the scriptures at this point. Now, one thing that I feel is that I feel strongly about is this aspect of a Vaishnav demonizing. A Vaishnav doesn't demonize. If anything, a Vaishnav Krishnaizes everything, sees everything in relation to Krishna. So kind of like to chip at this mentality or attitude of like, oh, we don't do that. Oh, pranayama is for these people. Oh, the Mayavadis. Oh, the impersonalists. Oh, the karmis, which I just cannot stand. I thought, how about talking about one of these topics and see how Gaudiya, how they can be tinged or seen through a Gaudiya lens, given that, that's what a Vaishnava does. Not only they don't demonize, they don't see demons, they don't look for demons, but there are so many instances where, we're called to have a bee eye compared to a fly eye, For those who don't know, the bee eye is always looking for the nectar, and a fly eye is always looking for poop or decomposing bodies. So I thought I would give these kind of talks in light of what my Guru Maharaj is fond of quoting when referring to Srila Maharaj. Not quoting, but mentioning how when Srila Prabhupada left, a lot of devotees felt without a shelter, and they seeked and found the shelter of other Vaishnavas. And I don't want to say that it's pratishta on the side of these Vaishnavas. First of all, because I don't know them, and secondly, because I don't expect a Vaishnav to have pratishta. But that could be the case, or it could be the inexperience of the devotees approaching them. But this climate set in where some devotees started to feel like, oh, so and so talks about so many high things that I couldn't feel in ISKCON. Let's call it as it is, because at that time in the West there was only ISKCON, and so discrimination started to ensue. Oh, so and so says it like it is. He talks about these things that weren't talked about in that situation, in that society, and my Guru Maharaj is fond of mentioning the fact that Sridhar Maharaj would not talk about, obscure lila, manjari leelas and things from some scripture about some very, very intimate or high things happening from the lila point of view. But nevertheless, he was a very elevated. So in other way, he was saying that an elevated Vaishnav does not talk about elevated things necessarily, but he can talk about the most mundane and current and common things, but from the standpoint of the highest consciousness, from the highest point of view. Not that I have the highest point of view, but I'm saying that it's a very good exercise to just start from what we have around us and look horizontally, left and right, see what's around us, what we think is around us, what we think we are looking around us, and starting from the ground, and then look up and see if we can make it a more and more elevated affair. So, in light of that, I decided that if and when Padma Maharaj would ask me to speak again, I would just like to talk about. Well, the thing is that I just want to talk about Krishna. So no matter what the topic is, you could see it as an independentist, kind of like free spirit. I just want to talk about what comes to my, to my mind, and then I'll just give it a title like, yes, Pranayama, Gaudiya perspective, or next time it'll be something else. But then I just talk about Krishna in any which way that comes to my mind. So it's a mixture, actually. It's just me wanting to talk free wheel, but which is hard, actually. It's not as easy as having a topic that you can study and just talk about that. At least you have acharyas to quote and verses to quote. It's a mixture of that and also wanting to, soften the approach that certain Vaishnavas, or let's say practitioners, because again, a Vaishnav has a totally different view of the world, but certain young practitioners would have, based on what they hear over and over from older Vaishnavas or certain comments in the scriptures, etc. Now, so the third disclaimer is that because I haven't quite organized my thought, I'll be speaking more slowly to the delight of the translator, or at least, less quickly than last time, where I was all organized and I knew what I was going to say. So it's going to be a nice and chill presentation, full of breathing and thinking and sharing insights. Okay, so what was I saying about that? My presentation. Anyway, so now it just so happens that I wanted to give a Gaudiya perspective on pranayama. Right, like I said before, to dismantle this attitude, this like nasty, we don't talk about this, we don't discuss that, we don't adopt that practice. But also because I had my own realizations about what pranayama does, what breathing does, and breath control, which is not exactly a good term for pranayama. And because I have my own health issues. So, if pranayama can help you have a clearer mind, have less anxiety, have less physical problems, so that you can chant better, so that you can be less physically affected, why not? That is one consideration. But I must say that it is true. Ironically, the more I started to read into what people have to say about pranayama, and of course I went to, well, what's his name? Swami Vishnu Devananda, for example, is somebody who wrote a book very much in detail. And a lot of yogic, when you think of pranayama, you think of yoga, of a certain approach to reality that bhaktas don't have. So as I was reading their what they have to say about pranayama, I realized, well, I guess Prabhupada is right in you know putting down pranayama as a practice, because it comes with the whole process. It's part of hatha yoga. It's a discipline. It's a very consuming pursuit and practice that could distract and detract from the practice of bhakti. So, when I titled this a Gaudiya perspective, it means originally I thought it meant how a Gaudiya can see pranayama in Gaudiya terms, according to Gaudiya sensibility. But much later on, as in half an hour ago, I realized that there is merit to, given the Gaudiya perspective on pranayama, in calling it as it is, compared to the benefits that you can get from bhakti that may include the benefits of pranayama and beyond. So the beyond is what may be distracting or kind of confusing us sometimes, because we have such a high, lofty goal. And I don't know, I have a feeling, I guess personally in my own life, but I do hear and perceive people around me that, you kind of keep your head in the clouds and you don't know if your feet are dangling or even touching the ground. All right, so let's begin officially. I would like to ask the six of you, technically five of you, because one of them is a double user. Right now, well, actually, I knew I would have a little turn up for this kind of presentation, but you just never know. In my prayers, I prayed that I could change hearts, starting from my own, by just talking about prana. I prayed that my words would be charged with prana, because prana is not only breath, and we're going to discuss that very soon. Because these lessons are recorded, so you just never know who's going to stumble into them and then, maybe have some eye-opening experience again. Not because I am the one speaking, but because words are spoken through me. And you know how much, since my previous presentation, how much I invest in praying and in prayer. So, right, I wanted to ask the five or six who are present in this video call, how many of you are breathing right now? I'm leaving a few seconds for the translator. Actually, I'm going to have another sip of water. Chances are, I'm not waiting for the answer, because I'm quite sure that if you're here, you are breathing. So, my first realization was how profound. I'll be saying profound a lot. It's because a lot of things related to breathing alone, something so basic to material life, can have your mind go all the way, if I manage to organize my words and thoughts, to Radharani. We'll see that in the third encounter. And that's what I meant by a Gaudiya perspective. So, all right, let me spill all my beans. I read a book, an article, a chapter, years ago, about pranayama. And they were saying how when we breathe in, we should think of so, and no, sorry, when we breathe out, how does it go? Breathe in, think of so, or meditate on so, and when we breathe out, we meditate on hum. And for those who don't know, I'm talking about the Vedic aphorism so hum, which is a very famous utterance among the impersonalists and or Mayavadis. Soham means, in Sanskrit, saha means he, and aham means I. So he, I am that. And, one more thing that people are very fond of attacking, or let's say mentioning, but in a bit of an accusatory tone. Oh, they think that I am that, but I'm a servant of Krishna. Well, slow down, because it's not as black and white. And I'm not faulting anybody for making it sound black and white. Maybe it was never meant to be perceived like that, but it sure was perceived as a very black and white categorical statement over the decades. And I do understand the sense of urgency that Srila Prabhupada had among many. I mean, he's probably the only one who brought bhakti to the world in the 60s and 70s. So, in a notion of yogis or pseudo yogis who came to the West in the 60s and 70s, a sense of urgency and not wasting time, first of all, is a symptom of a bhava bhakta. And I'm not implying that Srila Prabhupada was a bhava bhakta or any more or any less than one. But certainly he was more advanced than me, I can tell you that. And let's just say that this sense of urgency to focus on Krishna's service was there, so he conveyed that from his personal standpoint. But also he needed to preach to a bunch of more or less clueless hippies things in the most straightforward way. First of all, because they were just confused. Some of them were just on drugs, or they had just abandoned drugs. And so they were like personally, individually confused and clueless, because how much did an American know about any of this? Years ago, my own Gurudeva says that yogurt was an exotic thing in the 60s. Yogurt comes from the Caucasus, Turkey. It was not as ubiquitous as it is now in the States, in South America, and Europe, as it was in Iran, Turkey. And he said yogurt was an exotic, foreign thing. Forget about yoga. It was like very, very new. So, Srila Prabhupada had this sense of urgency and, to be straightforward, plus his own personality. And on the other side, there were all kinds of what would you call them? Preachers, gurus, all kinds of people came from in the 60s from India to the States. So Srila Prabhupada kind of needed his voice as a representative of the movement of Sankirtan and the current of bhakti from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to stand out. And that's why he spoke in very black and white terms, so that people knew exactly what is what and what does what. Sometimes to an extreme, sometimes to a fault. Like, he would say Krishna when the verses would talk about the abhyakta, the unmanifest, or the absolute. And he would just say Krishna, because really it's a feature of Krishna. The absolute can be as personal as impersonal. And, given that he's an ambassador of bhakti, he said many times that, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan are all features of the absolute, and they're all fine. Because, by the way, impersonalist doesn't mean Mayavadi. But obviously he was stressing bhakti and a bhakti imbibed vision of the world and everything. And it's fine. But where did I start from? What was I saying? So all these preachers were coming to the West to talk about yoga and stuff. So yeah, Srila Prabhupada was doing that to a fault, meaning that, again, he was mentioning the name of Krishna when the verses were talking about just the absolute, or he would have his disciple painters put a peacock feather on Varaha or Nrsimha to hammer on the point that it is Krishna appearing as Varaha, it is Krishna appearing as Nrsimhadev. And something could be said about that. But if you appreciate the spirit in which Srila Prabhupada did that, it can all be harmonized. But that was the climate. On one hand, confused disciples or prospective disciples. On the other hand, the ocean of sounds coming from previous or contemporary other teachers. I wouldn't even know who they are. Say, well, Paramahansa Yogananda was one of them who influenced the West. I'm not quite sure on the decade. Or okay, I'm saying yes to Krishna Kumari. That's perfectly fine. So all these other teachers that came with their own presentations. So that was the climate. Now I think it's probably time to really relax and observe all these other realities around us, parallel to bhakti, in a less, how would you say, insecure way. And just like I said, because we have embraced the path of bhakti, see how we can see them without any, concept of right or wrong, or accusing anybody, or apologizing for anything. Just seeing it as it is, but through the eyes of a Gaudiya. What can be gotten out of, well, in this case, pranayama, like I was saying. After all, anything a Gaudiya does is tinged with their perception, with their feeling. Vaishnavism, well, any Vaishnavism, not just Gaudiya Vaishnavism, is a feeling. And in more, say, generic terms, all we talk about, no matter what the topic, time and again, it's all about, well, one of the main teachings, understanding how consciousness is behind matter, how consciousness kind of creates matter in a way, how consciousness shapes reality. There is bhava and there is tattva. The tattva is what it is, but how you feel about something really makes it the reality that you perceive. So it makes it, for all intents and purposes, more real. So when I talk about feeling, a Gaudiya feeling, a Gaudiya perspective, I'm talking not about sentimentalism, but I'm talking about seeing the world and living through the eyes of consciousness. Because that's what we're called to do, no matter what, no matter what the topic, no matter what the practice. It's that's what we are. We cannot do away with this reality that we're consciousness. We might as well understand it, if nothing else, intellectually, and act as such. And we will see that our perspective changes and reality will change. Will either show its true face or will just change. We will give reality a different meaning. Consciousness gives matter meaning. All right, so after this big introduction, what was I going to say? I asked you if you're breathing. So yes, you are breathing, but how many people think about their breath? And funnily enough, every time, without fail, somebody hears something said about breath or reads about breath, automatically they take a deep breath. And your consciousness goes to your breath. And now everybody, whoever I can see, is smiling because it's true. It happens every time. You hear about the importance of breathing or how, whatever, anything you hear about breathing, with breath you can alter your level of consciousness. You can control your mind, whatever you hear. And then people start taking a deep breath like, oh yeah, breathing. And like I was saying, I'll be saying the word profound a lot because it's profound how the metaphor between we breathing, which is such a substantial aspect of our life, breath means life, and we not being aware of breathing. For those who don't know, the breathing is ruled by, and that's where I fail you because I can never remember those technical terms, but something, the autonomic nervous system or something, the subconscious mind regulates the breathing because it's so important, so intrinsic to our life, to us living, that we cannot possibly forget to breathe. And yet we do. Like we do breathe, we don't forget to breathe in and out, because it's not even in our control, but we forget that we are breathing. At the same time, every emotion, every thought, every action actually even, is connected to a certain kind of breath. If you're crying, you're sobbing, you're breathing, you're barely breathing, and it's a very interrupted breathing. If you're happy and relaxed, your breathing is slowed down. If you're angry, you're panting in such a way. And so many facts are said about breathing that gave rise to these realizations I started to mention, and hopefully I'll manage to organize my words and thoughts in such a way that I can convey them in just as an inspiring way. So these facts are that, first of all, for those who don't know, in the Vedas, life, someone's lifespan, anybody's lifespan, is not measured in minutes or seconds or heartbeats or days, as we say in Western vernacular, like your days are counted or whatever. I was surprised to hear that in the Vedic view of things, every human being, every living being, really, but let's talk about human beings, has an assigned number of breaths. So in this lifetime, I'm allotted some, I don't know, a couple of million breaths. Now, it's kind of weird because that means, as it is the case, and as yoga is discovered, that if you slow down your breath, meaning we're supposed to breathe 15 times in a minute, what if you breathe just one time, twice, 30 seconds in, 30 seconds out? That means that, 15 times, 1 minute at the cost at the price of 15, or one breathing at the price of 15, you have lengthened your life 15 times if you manage to do that for every minute, for every breath. But we don't, because we're enmeshed with our consciousness and our karma and our thoughts in all kinds of activities that rule our lives. And a first consideration from a spiritualist point of view, not necessarily a Gaudiya point of view. And by the way, what I meant by a Gaudiya perspective, I didn't mean something super extra different, or it just meant, given what we know from a very generic Vedic based Shastriya yukti type of consideration, so reasoning, putting thoughts together based on what the Shastras say. So a very generic one, things that a Mayavadi could say, or an impersonalist could say, or any New Age person could say based on some notions that they got. But, some things will be more specific to a Gaudiya. And in general, like I said, it's just an occasion to talk about Krishna and the world as we, devotees of Krishna and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on the path of bhakti, will see. So don't expect, mind-blowing realization. Certainly not from me, despite my prayers, because, it depends on the purity of the person who prays. Anyway, so I was going to say, the breathing. Right. Are we living our lives to our fullest potential, or is life living through us? Like, you're just born, you go to school, you get a career, you get a family, and then you die, and you're like, what happened to my life? Like our song says, Kamala Dala Jala Jivana Talamala. Our whole life has just slipped away like a drop of water on a lotus leaf. Which, for those who have never seen a lotus leaf, it's very fatty and very waterproof, because it lives in water, but they need to breathe at the same time, so they would just rot otherwise. So life is just slipping away. Life is living us. We are not living our lives, and that's where pranayama kicks in. But before that, let me go on with further consideration. So our lives are characterized by a very, how would you say, set number of breathings, of breaths. So I remember in a Sunday feast, when I was in a Sunday feast in ISKCON, somebody quoted Srila Prabhupada, and apparently he was in the audience when he said that sex life shortens your life because on account of this, number of breaths, when you are engaged in sexual activity, you breathe very fast. And he actually went with that kind of panting with them, which I'm not going to do because I don't want to live shorter. But no, it's true. Like on both accounts, yes, you have a certain amount of breaths, and if you breathe very short and very fast, you're just shortening the duration of your life. But you could see it in more, how would you say, down to earth human relation or human terms, meaning that if you let anxieties pervade your life, or anger and all these passions and emotions, that in turn make you breathe faster and make you have short breaths, whether it's the short breath or the influence of all that anger and anxiety and resentment, either one is going to make your life shorter. The truth and the answer is that it's both. It's one means the other. They're correlated. They're not one the cause of the other. So it's true. If you are not in charge of your life and your emotion, then you will breathe in a certain way that means that you're like succumbing to those emotions, and emotions are very tangible energies. By the way, both the breathing and these emotions are prana. So we'll discussing what prana means in a few minutes. Now, I said that we have a number of breaths. Another profound thing is that the first thing you do when you appear in this world is take a breath in as a baby. First thing that happens, you just take a breath. If you're unlucky in the West, it's because you've been spanked by an obstetrician. And some, like in India, I think they massage the baby until they breathe normally. Either way, the first thing you do is to take a breath in, and that kind of signs your contract, your debt with the world of karma. In the womb of the mother, there's not a lot of karma you can do. What can you do? You can burn karma. You can, you can die in a womb. Another consideration of prana, the fetus kind of like partakes with the prana of the mother. They do say, I haven't verified that, but I heard that until the baby's born, it may happen that a soul enters the fetus and then leaves. For some reason, somebody had the karma of spending 3 months as a fetus, but then they needed to move on. And another soul can step into that body forming. Because that fetus kind of like takes prana, the food, the energy, the living energy from the mother's body. And so, yes, you can die in the womb. You can suffer the reactions, the repercussions, the karmic repercussions, but you don't do a lot of karma. What can you do? You can kick your mother, but not willingly. It's all like you're not plugged in to the matrix of the material world. So it's very symbolic. This breath in, you start your debt. You start by stealing air that you haven't created, to make it very drastic. And it's also meaningful, or if you want to see it in this poetic view, that the very last thing you do is give that air back. I mean, you could just say, well, it's just a diaphragm, right? You contract the diaphragm and it sucks air in, and when you die, that, you just don't have control over your muscles, so the diaphragm snaps up, and that's the end of it. But it could be seen, again, through the lens of a spiritualist, even just a philosopher, but, a philosopher or a spiritualist or a Gaudiya among the spiritualists, and it kind of makes you see how, wow, at every breath, it's like being born and dying, and the next breath is not assured. So that's pretty much what my presentation is going to be like, the tenor, the vibes of this presentation. What kind of realizations you can take from just breathing while going to work, and applying them in your life, like, wow, I'm breathing and it could mean that, or it reminds me of this. Like they say, there's a famous verse that says that at every rising and setting of the sun, like the sun is taking away your life at at every dawn and sunset. And so at every breath, we could also think it's a reminder that I was born in this world, and that I will die. It's a reminder that I'm enmeshed in a karmic debt trap of debt, where I just, without even wanting, just, well, actually, as a result of my previous karma, I just have to take, I'm compelled to take, no matter how little the amount of air that is taken into the lungs of a baby, it's just, you cannot escape it. So, but you're not a baby anymore. You're an adult who can reason about these things. And so we've talked about the number of breaths, which, by the way, I didn't mention. On account of that, yogis are celibate, so they do away with the pantheon of sex life to begin with. And also, what does that mean? Sex life, it means that, you have children, you have responsibilities, you have anxiety. If you're alone, you have much more chances to just beg, and something you will find to feed, to fill your belly. But if you have family life, another person, children, becomes more anxiety, more absorption of your mind. So that's also a way to say that sex life will just shorten your lifespan. But anyway, yogis do celibacy. They're celibate, so they don't engage in sex life. And most of all, they try to stretch their breath as long as they can, to hold their breath, and we'll analyze all these things in due time, with a view to lengthen their lives and hopefully accomplishing something in this life. I would guess making sure that it's the last one. But and that's where we differ, because the ego of a yogi, well, it's not ours. I was just reading recently how a yogi is. I don't want to sound reductive or dismissing, but really somebody who wants to follow the path of yoga wants to become the master of the world by just being the master of their own bodies. Or in other words, if you can control your mind and your own body, you control the whole world. And it's true well, it's actually quite true. There's a lot of truth in that, and we'll see what the world really is, what the world means, and how we interact with the world through our minds and senses. But yeah, the pursuit of a yogi is not ours. But what's ironic, what really shows you Krishna's sense of humor, is that in order to become the masters of their own bodies and all the energies, like all these yoga siddhis, becoming lighter, becoming heavier, grasping stuff from somewhere else and reading minds, etc., they're all done through regulation of prana. They all come from a certain practice. And all these powers, control over yourself and your psychology. So in order to become a master, you have to undergo such strict discipline. You have to be a slave and a servant. It's ironic. It's funny. Not funny. It's profound. There it goes again. You need to wake up early. You need to, how do you say, what is the word I'm looking for? Just mortify your body and your mind, your senses, your psychology in so many ways, under a strict sadhana, to become a master, only to realize that, wait a second, I've been a servant, I've been a slave to the cause. It's really interesting how, we on the other hand, acknowledge that the owner, the controller, the master, and we willingly also undergo sacrifices, some renunciations, some, adjusting of our worldview, but all the while keeping the master in mind, certainly not thinking of us as the master. And yet, the result is, well, same if not better, because we end up having very close proximity, very close absorption in the master, let's just say in Krishna. And who surrounds him, what he is into, and we just partake of that all. Like, the typical example of if we're best friends with somebody who's very rich and very famous, we get entrance to, the elite parties or this restaurant or wherever. I had a best friend in elementary school who was quite well off. And so his mountain house was in a region of Italy which is very expensive, where there are a lot of castles. He didn't own a castle, but it's like very primo tourist landscape, alpine landscape. The other house he had was in Capri, known by many as Capri. No, it's Capri. Capri is very, very, the real estate in Capri is through the roof. So I never went to Capri, but I went to his house in Val d'Aosta. And, he just had a lot of money. He knew celebrities. And I was just passively partaking of all that just for being somebody that he liked until we, parted ways in middle school. So that is the difference in approach with bhakti and yoga, one of them. And I just never realized how, like I said, a yogi wants to be the master of the world, and they end up slaving through their lives, and for a cause that, if you're lucky, you realize, wait a second, what am I doing? And if you're, well, unlucky, or if you're successful in your pursuit, at least you do have, a realization. You do have a transcendental goal. You merge with the absolute, if that's what they want, or they get to see the Paramatma, and themselves as a reflection of the Paramatma. But we would have a different preference. So what was I saying about that? So yeah, yogis try to lengthen their lifespan by holding their breath and breathing as softly and slowly as possible. Whereas we, like I said, the moment you talk about breathing, we become conscious of our breath. And that's, there you go again, very profound, how we, conscious being, bring our consciousness, in this case in the sense of awareness, to something so basic like our breathing. Because if you think about it, you can stay without sleeping several hours. You can stay without eating or drinking several days or several hours. You cannot stay a whole long without breathing unless you're a yogi. So life really means breathing, or breath really means life. And yet, we don't pay any attention to our breathing, just like we don't pay attention to our lives. I see, and I don't want to sound condescending, but I used to go to Nicaragua every 3 months for visa purposes. I used to go to Nicaragua for 3 days every 90 days. And here I'm protected and sheltered in the life of an ashram, and I would see all these people so busy, and I really got this idea that they are the protagonists of the movie of their own lives. They're so important in their little things, and I was there sitting on the bus thinking, everything is so important. Oh, I have to take my little girl, and whatever it was, to me looked like so, like a script, like it was just a drama, and they don't really know who they are. Not like I know who I am, or at least in theory, I have some kind of feeling of what I'm supposed to think that I am. And so I had this feeling that life was just slipping away, and or if they gave anything, any value to anything, it was to getting married as soon as possible, or get a job, or if you want to be, if you're a little higher than the rest, some people say, I want to leave, and what do they say? I want to make a difference. I want to be remembered after I'm gone. I want to make something that I can be remembered for. But still, it's all about me, 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 me. There's no sense of anything higher or better that we can become or associate with. Now, I'm going to take a little pause in the middle of everything to ask if there are any questions or comments, because we're 8 minutes to the end, and last time it was a bit chaotic. I had hard time figuring out how to go live on Facebook and stuff. So I want to give more. I want to give the six people who are present in this presentation um, a chance to ask any questions, either in written or in with voice. And if not, I'll just go on. Meanwhile, I'm gonna mute my phone because it's driving me crazy.
Pranam Shamsundar.
Yes.
So I
Pranishta.
remember, Haribo.
Haribol.
So I remember as a young devotee, I read from Prabhupada's books this idea that we have a certain amount of breaths and we shouldn't waste them. And so my immediate thought back then was like, there's clear evidence in science, for example, that cardiovascular training lengthens your life, but you huff like crazy when you do cardio training. And so that aspect of it never really made sense to me. Like, say, for example, like we got Gurmach into biking because we specifically wanted him to have a longer, healthier life and bicycling. And so, from the yogic point of view, like, are we actually making a mistake? And Gurmach's gonna, obviously, he's not under the karmic sway in the same way. So I'm just kind of like joking partially, but just as a um, like a principle, how would you answer that question? Like, doesn't
Hmm.
cardiovascular training actually lengthen your life instead of
Yeah.
shortening it?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask Kali Yuga Pavana if you can hear the question, right? I don't need to repeat it, or it's only the Spanish ones. Okay. Did you have a time to translate it? All right. So, well, yeah, it's true that if you do cardiovascular activity, a lot of things happen. Your lymphatic system, your heart pumps more, so more nutrients goes to your organs. There's more communication. The nerves communicate better with the brain. They tell them what needs to be done, what organ is failing, what nutrition needs to go to what organ, and everything. On account of all that movement, the lymphatic system takes care of all the impurities, and movement is, I mean, I know all about it. Ever since I got diagnosed with gallstones and hypothyroidism, I've been like, when I'm not looking at video recipes and street food and all that on YouTube, I'm learning health stuff. So yeah, it's very, very important. My first question or response to what you said is, how do you know that that person wasn't supposed to live even longer? Like, we don't, the thing is that we don't know how many breaths people are assigned. So what scientists are saying is that on average, people who do cardiovascular activity live longer than people who do nothing at all. These people that do nothing at all, are they free from anxiety? Do they never cry? Do they never get angry? Do they not have sex? Do they not have any preoccupation with sex and what causes them anxiety, what causes them anger? And they're totally enmeshed in all these emotions that I guess we'll see next time are prana, and they have a very strong energy that does reflect on the physical sphere. And on top of it, they don't do cardiovascular activity. So yes, if you do cardiovascular activity, if nothing else, you'll get, physical purification going on. You'll get endorphins. You'll feel better. You'll feel like, to hell with my coworker. I feel so much better after a run, and life is different. Oh yeah. So see, it's a matter of perspective. It's there's no way to tell how many millions of breaths everybody has assigned for every given birth. So that cannot quantified and tested by a scientist. A scientist can also match a material condition with another material condition. And again, to put the Gaudiya spin or tinge on everything, it's you could ignore everything else about the health and just think, wow, I have a limited amount of breaths. I should just make the best use of these breaths by pursuing the ultimate goal, if you're that lucky to even have a feeling that there's an ultimate goal to life. So that would be my answer, just off the cuff.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, well, I guess we're 3 minutes away. Well, I managed to give a very generic presentation. Next time, I'll be that much more prepared by 1 week. Not that I wasn't prepared this time. I just didn't have a time to collect my thoughts because I have a lot of things going on. And or if there's any other question, I'll be happy to. Let me see. Let me just see if there's anything going on Facebook. I don't see any comments. So yeah. Next time we'll be talking about, again, you have to pardon, the nature of the talk is such that I need to talk about pranayama and what it is, what the benefits are, what happens when you breathe in, when you breathe out, when you hold your breath, and otherwise we don't have a common ground to talk about. But I'll try to inject any philosophical consideration or spiritual consideration, even more so in the third encounter. So thank you everybody for participating, and I hope I was of any help to all the ones present and the ones who will look at the recording. And I'll see you next week. Thank you.